They tore down my dad's memorial flag. No warning, no explanation. Just gone. Like it meant nothing. What would you do if your last tribute to someone you loved was banned by a bunch of power-drunk neighbors? I'm a quiet systems engineer, moved here with my wife for peace and space. We loved how the neighborhood looked, calm streets, decent folks, and just the right amount of trees. But that illusion shattered the moment the HOA decided my tribute flag was a violation. Comment B, we raised the flags together on a sunny Saturday morning, my wife steadying the ladder, me threading the cords through the pulley. The top was the American flag, crisp and proud. Beneath it, slightly smaller but no less meaningful, was a navy blue flag with my father's unit insignia, a golden trident wrapped in thunderbolts. My old man served 22 years in the Navy. That flag wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was memory, legacy, pain, pride. It was him. We both stood back once it was up, took a breath, and saluted. I'm not even a guy who usually gets sentimental, but seeing those two flags waving above our lawn, that was a moment. A week later, I opened my front door and found a bright red violation notice duct taped to the glass. Not even gently slid into the mailbox, duct taped like a crime scene warning. Bold black letters screamed across the top. Unauthorized display of symbolic materials. Code violation. 14.6. I blinked at it, half expecting it to be a prank. It wasn't April. This wasn't college. I scanned it again. Apparently, my flags, especially the lower one, were in direct violation of a new regulation passed by the HOA last quarter. I read it twice more, then muttered, "You've got to be kidding me. I mean, really? It wasn't like I was flying a pirate flag or a political banner. This was a military tribute, one that had been up for exactly 6 days before they came for it." That night, I dug into the HOA bylaws. Buried on page 47 of a 62-page PDF was a new clause, slipped into the visual harmony section. No personal flags or symbols may be flown outside homes, with the exception of the U.S. or state flag, limited to one display only. Apparently Carla Deems, the self-declared Queen of Order and president of the HOA, had rammed it through after a few residents started flying pride flags and "Don't Tread on Me" banners last season. Her justification? We must preserve visual uniformity in the neighborhood. Visual uniformity. As if people's personal identities and tributes were messy garden gnomes. Still, I figured this was just a misunderstanding. The American flag was clearly permitted, and the lower one. It wasn't political. It wasn't promotional. It was a military memorial. So, like any rational adult, I started by sending a polite email to the HOA account. No response. 3 days. Later, I sent a physical letter, certified mail, outlining the flag's meaning and requesting clarification. I even included a photo of my dad in uniform, standing next to the same flag on our old porch in South Carolina. Still nothing. Then, 5 days after that, I walked out for the morning paper and saw both flags gone. Not lowered, not folded respectfully. Gone. I ran to the side of the house. Nothing. Checked the bushes. Nothing. It wasn't wind. The pole was intact, the rope still looped. Just no flags. That's when I remembered the camera. I had a motion sensor camera on the porch, mostly, to keep porch pirates away from our Amazon packages. I rewound the footage, expecting to see maybe a kid messing around, or some contractor mistaking it for trash. But no. At exactly 3:12 a.m., a man in a neon yellow HOA-issued safety vest casually walked onto my lawn, unlatched the clips, pulled down both flags, folded nothing, and walked off with them bundled under one arm like dirty laundry. He looked bored. I stared at that footage for hours, heart pounding, not in fear, in rage. Because here's the thing, you don't erase someone's father at 3 a.m., you don't rip down a tribute in the dead of night like it's graffiti. I showed it to my wife. She cried. We sat on the couch, silent for a while. Later that evening, I attended the monthly HOA open forum. I had printed stills from the footage, ready to confront Carla calmly, hoping, foolishly, for accountability. When my turn came up, I raised the images and asked, why were my flags removed without notice? Or documentation? Carla didn't even glance at the photos. She just said with the smugness of a Disney villain, "We enforce visual code violations regularly. No further discussion needed." I replied, "But the flag was for my dad. It's military. This seems personal." She tilted her head. "All personal flags are banned. Doesn't matter who it's for. One rule for everyone." That was it. I left shaking, not just from anger, but from disbelief. I'd worked in systems engineering for 12 years. I understood rules, boundaries, and frameworks. But this wasn't rule enforcement. This was erasure, disguised as policy. The next morning, I walked out onto my lawn, looked up at the empty pole, and just stood there. It swayed a little in the breeze, like it missed the flags too. That's when it hit me. If they wanted silence, I'd give them spectacle. If they wanted everything uniform, I'd show them something unforgettable. So I made a quiet vow. To myself, whispered out loud so the wind could hear it. "You want to erase symbols? Fine. I'll give you one no one can ignore." I didn't know the plan yet. I didn't know how far it would go. But I knew this. I wasn't going to fight back with paperwork anymore. I was going to fight back with light elo if you've ever dealt with an HOA dictator. Bonus points if revenge included power tools or sarcasm. After the HOA president had my flags removed like they were trash, I tried not to explode. My instincts wanted revenge, sure, but I was raised to handle things with logic, not fire. So I did what any reasonable person would do first. I forwarded the security footage to the HOA board. No response, not even a bounce-back email. Just silence. The digital equivalent of someone looking you dead in the eye. And walking away. Fine. Round 2. I printed stills from the video. Crystal clear shots of the guy in the fluorescent HOA vest yanking down my dad's memorial flag, and took them to the next HOA meeting. Sat there through 38 minutes of people, arguing about mailbox colors and fence height before I was finally allowed to speak. I stood up, held up the photos. "Can someone explain why my flags were removed in the middle of the night?" I asked calmly. Carla Deems, perched at the center of the board like a board CEO, didn't even flinch. She leaned into the mic with the confidence of someone who hadn't been challenged in a decade and said, "We don't allow personal messages on display. It invites division." Division. Right, because remembering a military veteran is divisive. I clenched my jaw, tried not to make a scene. I could feel several neighbors looking at me, some sympathetic, some just uncomfortable. The meeting moved on. I walked home that night with a storm brewing behind my eyes. Not because they disagreed with me, but because they didn't care. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about community harmony. This was about control. And Carla? She needed to be in charge of everything, right down to the cloth on your flagpole. The next morning, my suspicions were confirmed. The HOA blasted out a mass email to the entire community. The subject line? Maintaining neighborhood. Aesthetics, a reminder. In it, they outlined new enforcement rules. No wind chimes. No decorative stones. No welcome mats with words on them, even ones that said welcome. No non-standard garden decor. And of course, no flags other than one U.S. or state flag per home. I laughed out loud when I read it. Like, actually laughed. It was ridiculous. They were banning wind chimes? What was next? Clouds? I showed my wife the email. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd pull a muscle. We sat in the kitchen, venting, mocking, tossing out sarcastic suggestions. Let's paint the house invisible. Maybe we should just exist in grayscale so we don't offend the landscaping. But underneath the humor was real fury. The kind that simmers just long enough to become something creative. That night, I started researching projectors. Not those backyard movie night ones. I mean serious gear, industrial-grade projection systems used for concerts, light shows, stadium displays. I dove into tech forums, product reviews, specs. I even messaged a guy in Vegas who builds immersive installations for EDM festivals. Within a week, I had one on order, a 40,000 lumen holographic projection rig. It cost more than my first car. But I wasn't going to let Carla erase my father's memory. While I waited for it to arrive, I planned. I figured out angles. Ran nighttime tests with a basic projector. Mapped out my lawn's dimensions and the reflective capacity of my siding. I even created a silent animation loop using old photos, my dad's insignia, and some archive radio chatter I had on an old hard drive. It was all legal. I double-checked with a buddy of mine who's a city code inspector. If it's on your property and it doesn't break noise ordinances, you're golden. Perfect. 2 weeks later, the box arrived. Massive, heavy, glorious. I set it up in the garage, spent 3 evenings calibrating it, and on a cool Sunday night, timed exactly to start 5 minutes after the HOA's monthly closed-door meeting ended, I flipped the switch, and suddenly, my lawn came alive. A 30-foot floating, spinning holographic version of my dad's flag shimmered in the air, bathed in soft blue light. It rotated gently, waving in artificial wind. At intervals, a faint sound loop played. Radio clicks. My dad's. Voice reading coordinates, and a short line from one of his old letters. There's no greater service than standing for something when everyone else is silent. I sat on the porch, arms crossed, sipping tea. It was beautiful. Within minutes, porch lights started turning on, curtains pulled back. One neighbor across the street came out in slippers, raised a thumb and said, "That's actually amazing." Morning, the HOA mailbox was probably a dumpster fire. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors I'd barely spoken to. Love the tribute. About time someone pushed back. Carla's gonna pop a vein. She didn't pop a vein. She went nuclear. By 8 a.m., I had a letter slid under my door with the speed and drama of a spy movie. Cease and desist. In bold, italicized letters, naturally. They claimed I was disturbing the visual cohesion of the neighborhood and promoting personal agendas. Personal agenda? My dad's funeral flag? I ignored it. Later that day, 2 police cruisers rolled up. A pair of officers walked onto my lawn like they were ready for trouble. I stepped out to greet them, armed with a folder full of legal documents and my buddy's written opinion, but they didn't even ask for it. One of them looked up at the hologram, nodded, and said, "It's not technically signage. You're good." Kinda cool, actually. The other officer added, "My dad was Navy, too. Respect." They left without incident. But Carla must have lost her mind when she saw the squad cars drive away without arresting me. That night, I updated the projection. Now, under the flag, in a slow, glowing loop, a caption faded in and out. In memory of those who served, including the silenced. People gathered on their porches just to watch it. Kids sat cross-legged on the curb, staring. And for once, the silence wasn't enforced. It was honored. That's when I realized Carla could control bylaws and emails, but she couldn't control light. She couldn't unsee it. She couldn't make the neighborhood unfeel it. And this was just the beginning. The Monday morning after I projected the tribute with the caption, "In memory of those who served, including the silenced," I woke up to a silent street. Not eerily silent, more like cautious, controlled. As if the entire neighborhood was waiting to see who'd flinch first. But by 8:15 a.m., Carla had already fired her first counterattack, a formal HOA-wide memo titled, "Urgent Compliance. Visual violations will be prosecuted to full extent of association policy." She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew. I was visual violation number 1. At 8:42 a.m., Dan knocked on my door. Now, Dan wasn't your usual HOA meeting type. 60-something retired firefighter, the kind of guy who still mowed his own lawn with military precision. He lived 2 streets over. We'd waved at each other maybe twice. But that morning, he had a sealed envelope in hand and a fire in his eyes. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, eyes scanning the street behind him. I was on the board before Carla bulldozed her way into the chair. She's not clean. Inside was a USB drive, labeled in Sharpie. Board notes, unreleased. I plugged it into my laptop right there in the kitchen. Dan hovered behind me, arms crossed, like a man watching a lit fuse get shorter. The folder held over 24 PDFs and audio files. Most were stamped with months and years going back 3-4 years. Meeting notes, internal emails, HOA violation reports with annotations. That never made it into the official records, but the patterns hit immediately. Flag removals, every single case was selectively enforced, all against homes with non-standard identity markers. A pride flag in 2022, violation. A Puerto Rican garden banner, violation. A back the blue flag next door to Carla's friend? No violation filed, and that wasn't all. In one PDF dated June 2021, I found a line that stopped me cold. Relot number 84. Mural violates uniform visual policy. Family has emotional attachment, but enforce repaint anyway. Avoid documentation. Lot 84 belonged to an older couple, the Dawsons. Their mural, a hand-painted sunrise on their garage door, made in memory of their son who died in a hiking accident. I remembered seeing it last year, and then one day, it was gone. Now I knew why. Carla had been selectively enforcing HOA rules, targeting anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of uniformity. I turned to Dan, jaw tight. "She's not just petty," I said. "She's dangerous." "She's untouchable," he replied, "unless we make noise." That night, I drafted an official petition under state HOA transparency laws requesting full access to archived meeting footage and records from the past 2 years. I sent it at 9:17 p.m. via certified email and CC'd every board member. No response. By the following evening, I received a short email from the HOA's generic address. Due to a technical issue, past meeting recordings are unavailable. Data was accidentally erased during a system upgrade in February. Accidentally erased. Right. They had wiped the evidence, or claimed to. Classic move. So I pivoted. If they wanted to erase the truth in private, I'd broadcast it in public. I spent 2 full days creating the next projection. Not a flag this time. Something bolder. I used screen captures from the deleted footage, the man in the HOA vest tearing down my dad's tribute, and overlaid them with a slow-fading question. "What are you really afraid of, Carla?" I positioned the projector to aim directly at the side wall of my house, which faced the street. This time, the image was 50 feet wide, so large it splashed onto the driveway and half the sidewalk. At 8:30 p.m. sharp, right when families were finishing dinner and opening windows, I lit it up. Within minutes, neighbors were out. Phones were up. I watched from my porch as the projection glowed across the night. Faces illuminated by digital truth. Some clapped. A few looked stunned. One woman whispered, "Finally," loud enough for me to hear from across the road. By 9:15 p.m., it was on. The local community Facebook group. One of the posts read, "Finally someone's calling this out. Years of double standards. It's time." I stayed up till midnight just watching people react. It wasn't chaos. It was awakening. By Tuesday morning, Carla had entered full PR crisis mode. I received an official notice of disruptive behavior from the HOA, hand-delivered by a board lackey at 6:42 a.m. The letter said my projection violated the spirit of the neighborhood charter and intimidated residents. I laughed so hard, I spilled coffee on it. At 7:10 a.m., my wife forwarded me an email from Carla's camp asking residents to report unapproved visual content. The HOA was literally asking neighbors to spy on each other. At 10:00 a.m., I got a text from a neighbor I'd never spoken to before. "Hey, check your mailbox. Someone left you a gift." Inside was a thick manila envelope. No return name. Just the words, "For the next projection." Inside were rejected permit applications, at least a dozen of them, all denied without explanation, all signed by Carla. But next to her signature on several pages were handwritten notes like, "Too bright, too flamboyant. They're not a fit for the HOA tone. They'll stir up the wrong type." Wrong type. That phrase rang in my ears. This wasn't just about flags anymore. This was about who Carla thought deserved to live here. That night, I upped the ante. I updated the hologram. Now, along with the stills and the main question, I added a slideshow of those permit notes, looping through in glowing red letters on the projection. "Too flamboyant. They'll stir up the wrong type. Avoid documentation." Erase quietly. Neighbors gasped as they read them. Cars slowed down. Someone honked. A teenager shouted, "Holy crap, this is like a movie." I let it run until 11:45 p.m., then shut it down. I wanted Carla to know I wasn't going away. The next morning, my front yard had a surprise waiting. A small garden flag had been planted by someone. It was navy blue, with a silver trident, just like my dad's, and a tiny handwritten tag attached. "For the ones who fought for us. We see you." I stood there for a long time. It was the first time since this started that I felt not alone. Dan called me at 9:03 a.m. "People are talking," he said. "You've got momentum. Let's move." I knew what he meant. This was no longer about just me or just my flag. This was about what Carla's regime had done to dozens of people quietly, and it was time to pull the mask off publicly. The media would be next. But first, we needed the community behind us. It was 7:12 a.m. when I opened the door and found the navy blue flag in my garden bed, a quiet tribute from someone who understood. No signature, just the silver trident stitched into it, and a tag that said, "We see you." I didn't cry, but my throat tightened in that way it does when something cuts past anger and hits where your armor used to be. That same morning, Dan texted, "Tipping point's close. Be ready." By 9 a.m., it was clear something had shifted. Normally, the HOA's morning email blasts were ignored or trashed, but now people were reading them and talking about them. Carla must have sensed it too, because at 9:23 a.m., she issued a brand new set of emergency guidelines. No projectors of any kind. No front lawn signage larger than 8x11 inches. No unapproved decorations. And this gem. Residents are reminded that disruptive behavior, including provocative displays or projections, will result in fines and legal action. Provocative projections. That's what my father's flag had become. But her panic wasn't just limited to policy updates. At 10:02 a.m., I saw a group of HOA board members walking door to door, clipboard in hand, like code enforcers in khakis. They stopped at Mrs. Kepler's home, a 78-year-old widow who had wine chimes and a flower bed shaped like a heart. 10 minutes later, she was crying on her porch with a violation notice in hand. That was Carla's move now. Total intimidation. Anyone who had supported me, even silently, was now in her crosshairs, but the fear she was trying to spread, it wasn't working. At 12:15 p.m., I got a text from Dan. "Meet me at Lot 52. Bring your laptop." Lot 52 was an empty patch of land down the street, technically HOA property but rarely used. Dan was already there with folding chairs, a thermos of coffee, and a stack of printed flyers. "So here's the plan," he said, laying everything out. "We form a coalition, Residents for Transparency. 14 of us already agreed. You'll be the face. I'll handle the legal side." "Me? The face?" He nodded. "You already are." By 1:45 p.m., we had a group chat live, a shared Google Drive for documentation, and a digital paper trail of every shady HOA move Carla had made in the past 2 years. Everything from the mural erasure to permit denials. At 2:20 p.m., someone anonymously leaked our group info to the local Facebook community group. The thread exploded. Screenshots of Carla's letters. Snippets of my projection from last night. Stories from neighbors who'd been silenced for years but never felt brave enough to speak. And then came the comment that changed everything, from a local blogger named Jenna Clay. "I'm a freelance reporter. DM me if you've got receipts." This sounds like a civil liberties nightmare. By 4:30 p.m., Jenna had spoken to me, Dan, and 3 other residents. By 6:10 p.m., she published a blog post titled "Homeowner's Hologram Challenges HOA Suppression." It included a still from my projection, the 50th message, "What are you really afraid of, Carla?" and a bullet list of Carla's questionable decisions. Within hours, it was shared over 300 times. At 8 p.m., I set up my projector for the biggest projection yet. I had spent the entire afternoon optimizing its throw distance, working with a wide lens expansion and adjusting contrast. This time, I aimed it directly at the side of the HOA office building across the street, which conveniently had a massive beige stucco wall facing the neighborhood. At exactly 8:45 p.m., the projection came alive. The words glowed against the building in stark white. "Free speech is not a violation." And beneath it, in rotating text, "Selective silence is still oppression. Transparency is not optional. We are the HOA, not just the board." People came out of their houses like it was a block party, folding chairs, phones out. Kids pointing. At 9:13 p.m., Carla appeared. Arms crossed, phone glued to her ear, pacing frantically. 5 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled up. I braced myself, but after 5 minutes of inspection and discussion with the officers, they left. No ticket, no order. Just a shrug from one of the cops and a parting line. "It's not illegal to tell the truth, ma'am." The next morning, retaliation came, and it was ugly. At 6:52 a.m., 5 residents received violation fines of over $150 each, some for unpermitted yard objects, one for parking at an improper angle, and another for excessive porch lighting. Carla was using the system like a weapon now, swinging it wildly, but this time, we were ready. By 10 a.m., Dan had filed a formal injunction with the County HOA Oversight Committee citing abuse of power and selective enforcement. And by 12:40 p.m., we'd compiled 47 written statements from neighbors. At 3:22 p.m., I checked my mailbox and found another anonymous envelope. This one was thicker. Inside were 20 internal rejection letters, permit applications that had been illegally denied by Carla without board consultation. On at least half of them, her own handwritten comments said, "Too flashy. Not our kind of resident. Avoid attracting outsiders." Those words made my stomach churn. I scanned the documents and uploaded them straight to our drive. Jenna, the blogger, messaged me immediately. "This is gold. This is enough for the city to get involved." At 7 p.m., we held our first in-person Residents for Transparency meeting at Lot 52. Over 40 people showed up. Dan spoke first. Then I spoke. Then Mrs. Kepler stood up and told her story about her wind chimes and how her late husband gave them to her for their anniversary. The crowd got quiet, then angry. The momentum was real now, no longer a whisper campaign. At 8:35 p.m., I fired up the projector for the 4th night in a row. The HOA office wall lit up again, this time with the words, "We demand a recall." Vote. Cheers erupted across the street. Someone brought sparklers. Kids started chanting, "Down with Carla." At 9:15 p.m., a delivery driver honked and yelled, "Nice light show," as he passed. It was no longer just me and my flag. It was a movement. By 10:30 p.m., Carla filed an emergency complaint with the city. But she didn't realize that her war against symbols had backfired. Now she had become the symbol of suppression. The last thing I did that night was update the projection to loop silently. This isn't just about flags. It's about control, and we choose freedom. It took less than 48 hours for everything to ignite. By Wednesday morning at 6:41 a.m., I stepped outside to get the paper and saw a news van parked at the end of the cul-de-sac, camera crew already setting up. A correspondent was brushing her hair behind a sun visor, while the producer scanned my house like it had just made national headlines. By 7:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with a request for comment. "Hi, this is Jill from KBTX Local. Can we speak with you about the HOA situation?" I texted Dan. "We're on," he replied instantly. "Meet me at my place by 8. Bring the whole file." We sat at Dan's kitchen table, a mountain of paper in front of us. The violations, permit rejections, Carla's handwritten notes, screenshots of her selective enforcement, and the now viral images from my holographic projection. Everything organized in color-coded folders, because that's just who Dan is. At 8:47 a.m., the doorbell rang. The reporter was early. Good. We gave her everything: receipts, timelines, photos, testimony. Jill's expression shifted as we walked her through each example. The veterans denied tribute flags, the mural family, the elderly couple forced to remove wind chimes, the illegal permit denials. Carla's wrong type of resident note at 10:12 a.m. The story was live on the local station under the title, "HOA President Accused of Discriminatory Targeting and Suppression Tactics." And just like that, the fuse met flame. By 12:30 p.m., the neighborhood group chat was in chaos. Screenshots from the article flooded every thread. People were tagging each other in disbelief, others in full-on rage. Carla did what to the Dawsons? She denied my daughter's wheelchair ramp permit last year, said it wasn't aesthetic. Time to clean house. At 1:55 p.m., Dan submitted the full evidence pack to the HOA Oversight Committee and State Ethics Board. At 2:47 p.m., the State Board acknowledged the complaint, officially launching a formal investigation into Carla Deems and her board practices. 4:05 p.m., Carla sent out a desperate, rambling neighborhood-wide email. "This campaign of misinformation is hurtful, defamatory, and endangering the unity of our community. I have always acted in the best interests of our values." She attached a photo of herself smiling beside a dog and an American flag, like that would undo years of discrimination, but it was too late. The projection that night, Wednesday at 8:30 p.m., was the largest yet. Same wall, same crowd, same clarity. The words burned across the stucco in a slow, looping sequence. Visual harmony isn't justice. Selective silence is still control. It's not about flags anymore. It's about truth. There were over 70 neighbors out that night. Someone brought snacks. A kid sold popcorn from a cooler. You'd think we were watching a movie. In a way, we were. The fall of a tyrant, frame by frame. Thursday morning hit harder. At 8:19 a.m., 3 more news outlets picked up the story. One from a regional paper, one from a veterans advocacy site, and another from a homeowner rights blog that gave it the headline, "HOA from Hell, How One Man's Hologram Cracked Open a Cover-Up." At 9:34 a.m., Carla didn't show up to the emergency board meeting she herself had scheduled. Instead, at 10:02 a.m., a generic HOA announcement was sent out via email. Effective immediately, Carla Deems is stepping down from her role as president of the HOA, citing personal health reasons. And just like that, she was gone. No apology. No accountability, just an exit wound and a messy legacy. But the damage wasn't done spreading. By 11:15 a.m., Dan received word that 3 of Carla's closest board allies had resigned under pressure. Apparently, 2 of them had already been quietly approached by the ethics board for interviews. The 4th member tried to hang on, but by Friday 2:03 p.m., he was voted out in an emergency recall initiated by the Residents for Transparency group. Within 72 hours, the entire HOA board was gutted. Dan was unanimously nominated interim president by 5:15 p.m. that evening. He didn't even want it. But everyone trusted him. And he trusted me to keep the light aimed where it needed to go. That Friday night, at 8:42 p.m., I powered on the projector for what I knew would be the final time. There was no spinning flag, no aggressive text, just one clear message, 50 feet tall, glowing softly on the HOA office wall. Truth isn't a violation. People applauded. Some wiped tears. At 9 p.m. sharp, I unplugged the projector. The crowd didn't boo or protest. They understood. It had done its job, and now it was time for peace. Not silence, but real, earned peace. Over the weekend, something incredible happened. Flags began popping up, one by one, across the neighborhood. Not in defiance, in recognition, a mix of tributes, cultures, causes. The kind of vibrant variety that made the community feel alive again. Even the Dawsons, the mural family, repainted their garage. This time it was a sunrise again, but bigger, brighter, with a caption underneath that read, "Grief is color. Don't paint over it." By Sunday morning at 7:22 a.m., the new HOA policy proposals were already in draft. Dan's first order of business? Reinstate freedom of symbolic. Expression ban, HOA surveillance and unapproved enforcement require full board transparency, set up resident-run monthly reviews, and finally, no rule may override empathy. People started talking to each other again. More waves, more chats, on sidewalks. The fear Carla built had crumbled. And the best part? My dad's flag, the one she tore down at 3:12 a.m. weeks ago, was back up by Monday morning. This time it flew next to 3 other memorial flags raised by neighbors who had been too scared to put theirs up until now. It flapped gently in the wind like it had never left. It was Monday morning, 7:08 a.m., when I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee and saw it. 3 more flags had gone up across the street. One rainbow, one POWMIA, and one that simply said, "You belong." Each one a silent act of healing. The projector was packed away now, stored in my garage beneath a sheet, still warm with purpose. I hadn't turned it on since Friday night's final message lit up the HOA office wall. Truth isn't a violation. The neighborhood felt different. Now not louder, just freer. Kids chalked drawings on the sidewalk. Someone tied ribbons to a tree by the community mailbox. Even Carla's old corner, once so aggressively trimmed and sterile, had wildflowers popping up in the mulch. Nature had a sense of irony. My wife and I started walking the neighborhood each evening around 6:45 p.m., something we hadn't done in months. We passed porches with welcome mats that actually said welcome, garden statues that had mysteriously reappeared, and lawn chairs left. Out in bright defiance of uniformity, at Lot 52, where we had once gathered in resistance, someone had installed a bench. Painted onto the wood in bold white strokes were the words, "This is where silence ended." The new HOA leadership, Dan and a newly elected resident board, moved fast. Within 10 days, they had ratified a new charter, one built on inclusion, transparency, and fairness. The first official bylaw: no policy shall override dignity or expression. If it's not hateful or hazardous, it belongs. Simple, human, just like it should have been all along. I raised my father's flag again on Friday morning at 6:58 a.m. Same pole, same insignia. But this time, I didn't do it alone. My neighbor Miguel stood across the yard, hoisting his own, a green and red banner stitched by his abuela. 2 houses down, the Dawsons had painted a mini sunrise mural on their fence, smaller but glowing like hope. And above it all, in that soft golden hour light, the flags danced together in the breeze, unafraid, untouched. Some nights, I catch the glint of fabric just before the sun dips below the rooftops, and I hear my dad's voice in my head like it never left. He used to say, "Some people wave flags, others live them." I get it now, because it wasn't the hologram that changed this place. It was truth, projected, reflected, reclaimed. If this story hit you hard, hit subscribe, like, share it, and comment your wildest HOA story, because truth deserves a voice.